there's a quote from when Dune, I think it was one of the later Dune books, and he said, they increase the number of things that we do without thinking. Things we do without thinking, there's the real danger.
Hey there, welcome to Book Overflows, the podcast for software engineers by software engineers, where every week we read one of the best technical books in the world in an effort to improve our craft. I am Carter Morgan, and I'm joined here, as always, by my co-host, Nathan Toups. How are you doing, Nathan?
Doing great. Hey, everybody.
Well, thanks for being here, everyone. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, subscribe if you're on YouTube. If you're on an audio platform, leave a 5-star review. And some audio platforms do let you comment now or leave written reviews, so that always helps the podcast. Same with sharing it with your friends and coworkers. You can always book time with us on Leland if you want to talk to Nathan and I personally. Well, we put out a call for superfans last week. Thanks for everyone who reached out. And if you haven't reached out yet, please do. I've already talked with a couple of you guys, but we have an idea for how to use some of our superfans in some of our end of the year episodes. So we'd love to still hear from you guys. I'm trying to decide if it's a thing where we just need one person or maybe we'll need several people. But either way, we still love to hear from you guys. And with that, we're ready to finish our discussion this week of Beyond Vibe Coding, From Coder to AI Era Developer. This is by Addy Osmani. Addy Osmani, from our author introduction, he is a senior engineering leader at Google, where he works on developer experience, performance, and AI-powered software development tools. He has 25 years of industry experience building web technologies and has authored multiple books on software engineering best practices. In this book in particular, the introduction we have is AI is transforming software development, shifting programmers from writing code to collaborating with AI in an intent-driven workflow. Vibe coding, a prompt-first exploratory approach where you describe what you want in natural language and let a large language model fill in the blanks, represents a radical shift in the developer's role from writing code to directing it. However, vibe coding comes with a serious caveat. Like a high-speed exploratory vehicle, it can take you off the beaten path quickly. Beyond vibe coding, From Coder to AI Era Developer, explores how AI-powered coding assistants like GitHub Copilot and OpenAI Codex are reshaping the way we build software, from automating routine coding tasks to influencing architecture and design decisions. So, Nathan, we finished the book this week. What do you have for me? What are your thoughts on the whole book?
Yeah, looks like I forgot to fill out the section, but I do have some thoughts. This book kind of, it does it, just like we talked about last time, it builds on itself. The structure of it's like quite nice. We now have vocabulary and a way of thinking about things. But the second half of the book, or I guess the tail end, section 3, because most of the book is on trust and autonomy. Like that's the major theme. And I think for our listeners, that's probably the area that we maybe have the most skepticism or the most fear when it comes to these tools. And so I think it was a really healthy conversation or I guess healthy set of topics to think about in the second half of the book. I really appreciated his approach to it and the sort of caveats. Just like last time, though, he does get into some specific implementations of like agentic large language models, which I think are going to be outdated in like a year. As good as like the principles are, I think anytime he kind of ventures into like specific examples, it's just kind of with the territory, the thing's moving so fast. But I don't know. I really enjoyed the second half of this. What about you?
Yeah, I think this book, I'm trying to figure out, because there's a certain kind of book we read that's a little like this. And I think it is just kind of these more deeper technical books that kind of take like the smorgasbord approach, where they have to like talk about everything that's possibly related to the concept.
Yeah.
And then I think you kind of, I just found myself getting to points where I'm a little like, no, I understand how to talk to a chatbot and how to use it in my code. There's a lot of really interesting stuff here. I mean, he talks about like intellectual property concerns, he talks about like whether or not you need to disclose your use of AI. He talks about like the future of AI and like autonomous coding agents. Like there is a lot of interesting stuff in here. And the 30% that's really interesting is really interesting. Then there's maybe another 30 or 35% that feels like you kind of have to talk about it just to lay the ground for the interesting stuff. And then there's another 30 to 35% that's a little like, I got it. Like, you know, I know this already. So I don't know. We've had a couple books that kind of follow that pattern, and I just would be so curious because obviously the authors who write these things are smart guys and gals, and so I'm like, why do the books kind of turn out looking this way?
Right.
Is it just like a Manning O'Reilly thing? I don't know.
Yeah, it is curious. I wonder if they actually have, and I'm just completely guessing here. Like, wonder if they have like readers who will, like spot check aspects of the book. And they're like, can I pick this up on a chapter that looks interesting to me and get enough context to understand? And I think if you take that approach, then yes, they kind of like have a self-describing thing. But of course, for the reader who's reading it end to end, I did find that like, yes, there was a little bit of repetition that I think of maybe I was more sensitive to by the end of the book, where I was like, okay, no, we got this. I don't need the foundations on this again.
We should call it, because we talk about like we judge these books based on like, hey, how enjoyable is this to read cover to cover? Which I'm just realizing now we should call the end to end test.
End to end to ooh.
Yeah. That's a funny little programming humor for you guys.
So maybe the integration test would be, does the chapter, work within itself?
But because I did find myself when I was just kind of like previewing, like, okay, what does the second half look like? And I was just like looking through the index, and I was kind of like, oh, like that looks interesting. I want to jump ahead and read this. And when you kind of read the book a little more like that, then I think maybe that's how they're intending for people to read these books. Like maybe they're not supposed to be read end to end. And so again, this is just another one that like I think maybe if you jumped around a bit more and kind of just picked out what seemed the most interesting to you, it reads a little easier. But I mean, you can really tell like Addy knows his stuff, and I think it's really neat that someone went out and wrote this book, because we're going to talk about it, and we have talked about it, that like there's a lot of stuff in this book that's going to be dated, and it's going to be dated pretty quickly. But I also think it's really cool that someone was like, you know what, I'm going to write the AI development book right now.
Right.
And I think there's something neat about kind of being the first person on the scene with that, and obviously it's worked for him. He's gotten a lot of buzz from writing this book.
Yeah. And I will say, again, I can't say this positively enough, the structure of this book, and especially if you look at how he addresses topics, like I remember chapter 8, we won't have to get into it quite yet. Chapter 8 really stuck out to me because it's security, maintainability, and reliability. And so obviously somebody like me with a background in DevOps, this was very interesting because it kind of plays with this idea of, okay, well, how do you this very powerful tool that can get really out of hand, how do you actually handle this in a systematic way that is actually safe? And those are unsolved problems, but he gives you like a framework to think through it of like, okay, well, and again, I think I've talked about this in other episodes. I always, he talks about in the book this like very capable junior dev. That's kind of how we talk about it. And I've talked about what I called the capable intern pattern, which is this, fresh out of college, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, feels very confident about all of the stuff that they just learned, and is also very wrong sometimes. And you just kind of have to like call them on their BS. That's how I feel a lot of times when I'm like struggling with these large language model tools, because they'll just like lie to your face, right? Hallucinate. Right. That's what we call it. But if you are presenting code as if it's from you, or and he has these golden rules. I think we'll get into these as well. There's the golden rule. It's like never, what is it? It was something about like never committing code that you don't understand. Well, yeah. That's just a good rule of thumb in general. But your reputational harm would be bad. Like imagine you use an AI tool, don't let anyone know that you're using an AI tool, push code into the repo that you don't understand. This is a recipe for disaster, because you're basically like relying on your reputation that this is okay. Right. And if it undermines your credibility, just reputational harm on yourself alone, but it's also bad for the business. It's bad for, bad hygiene, all these things.
I wanted to ask you about, he talks about with vibe coding, kind of like different approaches, in particular with prototyping, where it's kind of two approaches. One, you create the prototype kind of knowing that you're going to throw it away and then start it all over and build it properly. And then he talks about evolving the prototype from kind of like the beginning vibe coded thing to what it's actually supposed to be. You ever been in a position where you need to whip up a prototype really quickly, and then do you favor either of those two approaches, then throw it away or evolve it?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. So I have a personal example of this with this podcast. So I vibe coded this little tool. I think I mentioned it last week a little bit, called Backchannel, and it's how we can coordinate who gets to go next when we're interviewing an author. Basically, we didn't want to be distracted by typing a bunch of stuff in we could use, an existing chat tool, but you very obviously can see that you're splitting your attention. It's rude to the guest. Right. And you also, if you don't mute, you're like tap, 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 tap. And so I was like, well, what if, most of the time we're just coordinating, like, I have got a follow up question, or you go next, or hey, let's wrap this up. It's a pre canned, responses. And so I just made this really quick tool. I wanted to use an excuse to try Peer.js, which is like a WebRTC chat thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I wanted pre-canned responses, and I literally just like vibe coded just to see what that was like. I vibe coded this thing, and it was pretty basic and pretty ugly, and but it got the job done. Like that was like 8 months ago, actually. And but then I've been evolving this over time, where I'm like, actually, this tool's pretty neat, and we use the really prototypey version, and then I've been like putting time and attention, where I've been using a lot more of these like augmented AI patterns, where I've been doing fundamental refactors. The UI is way different, the structure of the code is way different. And so it's been to my experiment of being like, can I get like a quick and dirty version of something that's kind of useful, and then turning into something that and also with a decent amount of code I didn't quite understand, right?
Mhm.
And it handled some, like, we would get randomly disconnected sometimes. All these like weird things were happening because I really didn't understand the code. Like I read Pure.js's SDK library. It had a bunch of callback stuff. I kind of understood what the code was doing, but I didn't really. I didn't have good test coverage. I didn't do any of the advice that was in this book. But I have that now. I actually have full end-to-end tests with Playwright. I have unit tests for business logic that I've pulled out. And now I can actually like augment my AI code with like, and the thing is, this is a true AI augmented application that I built from day one. It's, I'm deploying it on fly.io. So I'm not even handling real infrastructure. It's just like, I've got basic DNS. I bought a domain name for it and playing around with that. And so I guess at work, no, like at my, $ day job, I have not done this end to end, but for this personal project, and I will say, like, I have mixed feelings about it. Like, I think we'll probably lean back and talk about this through the framing, because some things I think I could have built better from day one. Other things,
Right.
like, dealing with a web UI or something, was a pretty big change. But yeah, I will say at work though, I will prototype a lot with it. So
Mhm.
this gets to the John Osterhout idea of design
Design
it
it twice.
twice.
Yeah.
I love this. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll, be the conductor, where I'll say, hey, this is the current implementation. I think that these other patterns would be better. I think this is the approach. Like, I'll be pretty hands-on in like planning mode. And I'll say, help me write a benchmark for testing these two implementations. And then I might even get it to vibe code, or not vibe code, but like do a basic implementation of one of those. And then maybe I'm really sitting there understanding line by line everything that we're doing in this new implementation, because I have a clear idea. And then I use this benchmark to test the old and the new implementation. And of course, I have to spend a lot of time and energy thinking, like, is this actually a fair benchmark? Are these things in place? But I will use the tools like that so that I can basically just compress a window upon which I'm like, is this worth the effort? Right? Am I reducing memory allocations, or am I, is this, so many ops per, is it nanoseconds per op or whatever faster, that it's worth spending another half a day getting this, PR put in? I will use it that way. And I find that really useful, same way that I would pair program with someone if we're trying to tackle a problem, but quicker, because I don't have to like wait for other things. So
We're pretty
that,
good at design it twice at my work. The problem is we design it the second time after the first time has already entered production. Right.
yeah. Yeah, that's one way to do it.
Yeah. But like I appreciate, and like we just had for like our online content library, we set up like our data model, and like it works, like it got everything out to production. But then as we started adding more kind of types of content entries, like we just realized like, I don't know, like this is starting to get this is a little inflexible. And we got to the point where we're like, okay, we need to add this new type of content entry. We could staple it on to the existing model, or we could take the time necessary to like refactor this and make this kind of more extensible and like what we want it to. And so I was proud that we as a team like fought for like this is a good priority. This is something we should put time on. And then one of our engineers was really excited about the task, and so he implemented it all from start to finish. But just kind of thinking back on it, I'm like, I don't know. I think if we had thought about this for like 10 more minutes when designing this data model, we could have come up with this current data model. Like I don't know how much, I don't know how possible this was only by deploying to production and seeing the pain points. I think we could have envisioned some of these pain
Yeah,
points.
I think, and I've talked about this in the past too. Like one of the best teams I've ever been on was at this fintech company, and we had this. Like you can think of this as an ADR or RFC or whatever sort of design document. And our team was pedantic about this one date time column that we needed to understand how to like reconstruct track records for some data modeling stuff. And we had this huge debate back and forth, data engineer, some principal software engineer, all these other folks, until we actually got to a shape that we were happy with. And at first I felt like it was very wasteful. I'm like, man, all these people are just back and forth. And then we never had to think about it again. That was like I've never seen this before. We were like, oh, this is the schema. It's well reasoned about. And it was just not controversial. You could always reach back and go, yeah, but how do I do this one other thing? And you're, oh no, it's in here. The edge case is like outlined and here's how we handle it. And I always appreciated that as like, it wasn't a waste of time. And it was one of those things where it was like, if it was one data structure that only affected one team, it would have been too much. But this was like a common idea of how we describe looking back over time to like these append-only databases, that since we generalized this pattern, everyone knew everyone else's project would use this. And it was one of these like sort of nice just design decisions that handled it. It was a deep understanding of how we structure our data. It was a deep understanding of how the data models worked. And we went from there. And so, yeah, it is at the same time, if you have the wrong people on your team, there are some people who think every decision should be like this. And, and those people they are wrong. You should not, send your design to a committee every time.
But that gets at what Addy talks about in this book, which is that as AI gets better at generating code, and can generate more and more code, where does your value lie as a developer? And a lot of it's going to lie in your domain expertise and your understanding of the business. And I think, like you talk about, you say some people think every decision should be that, and it's exhausting. You have to kind of know the context that you're operating in, and the context that Leland right now is really interesting, where we have the one-on-one coaching business, which is very stable and generates enough revenue to kind of help us fund these other, like not moonshots, but like these other, trying to expand the business a bit more. And so we're working on kind of some of these expansion projects. But with that comes this kind of feeling of like, okay, we're not contributing necessarily to like the core of this business that we're going to use until the day we die. We are working on something that might not exist in 6 months. And so we're kind of constantly balancing like, how much time should we spend discussing this, and how much time should we spend like making sure we have everything done exactly right, and how much should we just ship something and see like, does this actually expand and grow the business? But I think knowing that business context makes you a much more valuable engineer. And I think we've talked about this on the podcast before, but just like, don't shy away from it. And I'm personally frustrated with engineers who kind of think like, but that's the business's problem. I produce the code. I'm like, you can't separate the two out.
And I'll tell you, if you've ever said that in your career, it's not the end of your career, but I will definitely, it's a limiting factor. You will never,
it is. Yeah.
If you're just like, I'm just going to do my tickets and go home at the end of the day, that's fine. And there's companies in which that's the terminal level, right? You're just going to kind of do this work assigned. But if you have ideas of where you want to go next, or if you have a startup idea, these other things, it's completely toxic, because a lot of times we don't think about this, I think, in the right context, but we're highly creative. Like our work is highly creative. It's deeply technical, right? That's why we get the salaries that we get. The other side of that is that we're also deeply creative. And the best engineers that I know are the most aggressive about learning the business case. And I delayed this myself. I was like, oh, well, I'm in infrastructure and I am generalizing these problems, and it's not really, it doesn't really matter if I don't understand the business case for this. That was really a limiting factor in my career. And when I quit doing that, it opened up a lot of doors, because yeah, most people don't have the mix of, I'm willing to get deeply technical and pedantic about structure, about these other things, and I also listen to the C-suite and see like, hey, we need to make this business case. Or you're right, especially with startups, like we may not be here in 6 months if we miss these opportunities.
Well, let's talk. Sorry,
No, so yeah, so it was kind of interesting. The way that the halfway through the book ended it was we wrapped up with this sort of like building web applications with AI, which I think is kind of like where we're bookending this little section,
Right, right.
which is a very different feeling than the rest of the book. And so I think we're going to kind of have this as well. I will say one quick couple notes. Building web apps is interesting because web apps are inherently complex, right? As
Right.
soon as you start structuring your work, um, yes, you can vibe code a really simple proof of concept, probably like a funnel that gets people to sign up for something, right? Like those things you could do pretty quickly. But one of the things I dealt with Backchannel was as soon as I realized, first of all, I wanted a UI that was actually nice. One of the things I found that was really helpful was don't ask it to come up with a nice UI. I know that there are some tools like ChatGPT and some other ones that actually do pretty good UI work. But I actually found way better is I actually used you could either use a tool like V0, which I don't know if you know about. V0 is Vercel's large language model that's specifically focused on like Next.js, ShadCN, templating tools. So it builds this based off of like a templating framework. And so it looks nice because it's actually got like a lot of structure. I've also found that if you like either buy a commercial template, like a Tailwind UI commercial templates, or get a free one, and then ask the large language model to use the template. Say, hey, I've got these components. I want to use this. This is the sort of like default splash page. It does a much better job of operating within those constraints instead of giving it an open-ended thing like, give me a nice UI, right? Something like that. And so I ended up getting a lot of benefit from giving it a base template and saying, I want to use this subset of components to build this next thing. And then it doesn't, anytime I try to get the large language model to be less creative, I'm always happier with it, I guess.
Yeah, it was funny. The guy who invented Tailwind on Twitter was like, "I'd like to personally apologize for us making the Tailwind default button blue, because now like every AI generated front end that you're like, oh, make a snappy UI, like it's like that blue and purple look that you see everywhere."
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I've been impressed with its ability to do UI work. Like I'm with you. Like you need design sensibility. I actually really like that about my current place. Is like we have really good designers, in particular our head designer. Like I just he's got good taste, and I like that. Working with his designs. But yeah, like I've been impressed at its ability for me to be like, okay, I need a card that looks like this. It should have padding on the edges, and I need this stuff centered. It's got 3 different sections, and the top one should be top aligned, but the middle should be centered, and the bottom one should be bottom aligned. And it all needs to be done using like Tailwind. And like I'm impressed. Like a lot of the times, I mean, it doesn't get it 100% correct all the times, but like it gets me pretty close. And then I just kind of come in with the scalpel and get it working. But I wouldn't trust an AI to be like, okay, make this whole UI for me, right? Like,
No, and I would say trust it to your own peril. There's actually a
right.
quote from this summary at the end of that last chapter before we get into autonomy and trust. It says, by now, you should appreciate how vibe coding makes prototyping feel more like brainstorming with an assistant rather than grinding out boilerplate. And that's actually like that's how my relationship with tools like Claude Code are. I'm always suspicious of the quality on the first pass, but I'm very open to the suggestions and the structure of how it's approaching things as a way to give me another viewpoint on my work. And so I'm very open to the idea of this like brainstorming with an assistant. I love that pattern. And I feel like it's helped me with like analysis paralysis, right? Like I'm a recovering perfectionist, which really means I'm a procrastinator. And so this breaks me through procrastination faster. And I think from a productivity standpoint, that's where it's been the huge win, is that I basically can reduce the choices that I'm making down to a set of choices. And a lot of times I will do this. I'll be like, hey, come up with 3 or 4 ideas on how I would approach this. And then I pick from those and I go, oh no, that's actually never will I ever do this, or yes, this is a good approach. And so that's helped me. I mean, again, I use it as kind of like an icebreaker. It's helpful for me to not just be like, what's the perfect design? And, go off on the mountain and try to write
Yeah.
the 10 Commandments. Right?
I don't know if I'd call myself a procrastinator. Maybe that's exactly what I am. But like starting things can be tough for me. Like I don't know why. It's like I just have to like convince myself, like, hey, every task you've done, you've succeeded at. Like you know,
Right.
or you've completed all your tasks. So like, why would this one be any different? But so I do appreciate like Claude for that. Like sometimes it's easier just to be like, okay, like, there's I had to update like our video processing logic for Cloudflare Stream and instead of I don't know why. Again, like it's not hard to find that logic in the code base, but I just told Claude to do it. I'm like, there's logic in here for Cloudflare stream processing. Find it for me. And then I got up and refilled my water bottle. And when I came back, it was like, okay, here it is. And then like okay, a little easier to get started now.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I love it for that. As a research assistant on a code base that I'm trying to get familiar with, especially if you give it prompts that are saying things like always cite your sources or give me, the file and line number, it reduces hallucinations tremendously. And yeah, it's interesting. Okay. Well, I think this gets us into the sort of the meat of the end of the book, which is this trust and autonomy.
Trust and autonomy.
Whew. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, well, there's a lot of great stuff in here. One thing that stood out to me at the top of it, he talks about like common security vulnerabilities. It talked about package management, but it made me think of, do you remember we had Neil Ford on? And he talked about this idea that one concern they have with AI is that it might hallucinate packages and like packages that don't exist. And then a threat actor might understand that an AI is hallucinating or continually hallucinating a kind of package that doesn't exist, actually go create that package and then try to like maliciously inject themselves in your code base. To my knowledge, that hasn't happened yet. But I thought it was kind of a neat concept.
Yeah, I think that in combination with the fact that I think it was Anthropic showed that you can poison a model with a surprisingly low number of documents that are compromised. Like I think they were showing, it's really low number. And so I think that that's solid research along with Neil Ford's intuition that I think this is a real problem. I mean, not only could you could do a couple of things too. One is, what if there's an abandoned open source project that has let the NPM endpoint lapse, or you see it hasn't been updated in a long time, and you go find that developer and you butter them up and you become the new maintainer, right? We have seen that actually happen in the wild, where it's like one overstressed developer, and I think some state actors from some countries came in and were like started fixing things, built up trust over like 6 months, and then got volunteered to take over as maintainer and then put malicious code in. I think this is might have happened with like there's a crypto wallet hack that happened not too long ago. I think it was related to this. But then there's the Neil Ford one. Yeah, it's like the hallucinated path. And I've seen this before with like some Go code that I was doing where it was like not the right, it was almost the right path to the module. It was just invalid. But it would like, it hallucinated this. It hasn't happened in a while to me, but yeah, it's a real worry. I think that it's a big deal. And I think, what was it? I was reading recently, somebody was saying that, all AI dependencies are third-party dependencies, right? Because even they trained their data, like Anthropic, OpenAI, all these companies don't have a full understanding of all the data that they've trained their models with as well, right? I think we're also already seeing the fact that there are people who really hate these companies who are trying to poison the well, and so there's also stuff like there's so much. I've heard this anecdotally. There's so much like AI garbage, slop, art out there on the internet now that AI models are now being trained on this. And and this gets back again, we keep name dropping. This gets back to that question I asked Stephen Wolfram. And I was like, hey, what happens if we start training these models on more model output? And he's like, oh, there's a real risk that we revert to the mean, right? That that basically like it becomes unusable. And I think I haven't seen the episode yet, but you talked about Carl had recently done an AI episode
Carl
of like
Brown, Internet of Bugs.
Yeah.
The podcast. Yeah, he has a great episode on basically he says that there's a lie in the AI industry, and the biggest lie, which is that this is the worst the models will ever be. And he kind of lays out his argument that like that's not true. Like we don't. He's like, I'm not saying that the models will for sure get worse, but like this idea that they will only ever get better. He's like, it's software and hardware has continually improved, but software hasn't necessarily. Like honestly, look at Siri. Like there's an argument to be made that Siri was better when it first released. He kind of points out like, was Windows Vista better than Windows 7? Or was it Windows 98?
Or
Which one?
yeah,
Yeah.
XP and then was
Yeah, XP,
and,
XP.
and then
Yes.
Vista, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
was Windows Vista better than XP? You
Right.
know, he talks about Photoshop. He's like, why did Photoshop switch to monthly licenses? Because people weren't buying the new versions because they weren't necessarily better.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, is now a good time? I was going to say this for the hot takes, but we've come here naturally.
Well, and we can hint at it and go up. But I think you're right. Like there's some things that are exponentials.
Yes.
But if you look in reality, almost all exponentials, or actually, I would say every exponential is actually a logistics curve, right? And a logistics curve looks like an exponential. And then there's a threshold in which putting more effort looks like logarithmic. It all of a sudden, it's just like it takes double, triple, quadruple the effort to get a really tiny return. It almost looks like this kind of like flat S shape, right? So it goes exponential and then peters off. And it's entirely possible. Well, we're seeing this with like, we can say, and actually with hardware has gotten better, kind of, right? We've kind of moved the goalpost on what we expect out of hardware. But if it's really like clock speed on a CPU, we've hit a logistics curve like pretty hard, right? There's like a hard limit around what 5 or 6 gigahertz. And most people aren't willing to spend enough money to do that. And so we've kind of all settled on maybe 3 to 4 gigahertz per core is about what we all kind of expect. And it's been like that for like 20 years now, right? Like it's been a long time that we've had these like clock speeds. And we don't think about that. But that, when I was growing up in the 90s, clock speed was doubling. Like clock speed was doubling all the time. And so it'd just be like, oh yeah, it was like, it felt like it was going to be an exponential. And that one day we were going to have clock speeds of, 50 gigahertz or, 120 gigahertz or something. And that's just not. Now, if we talk about total computational cycles and distributed computing and multiple cores and all these other kind of interesting things that we've done to kind of overcome this, but that wasn't the promise. The promise was every year and a half or something, we're going to double clock speed. And that's just, so I think we're already seeing this with like, are you going to have to double, triple, quadruple, 10x the amount of money we spend to make the model marginally better, right? And I think that that's quite true. I think what we're probably going to do is circle back and go, you know what? Very domain specific models who solve lots of little problems in special ways, or coming up with the distributed compute idea of models of like, instead of doing one monolithic one that does everything, we have a bunch of specialized ones that kind of interact in some clever way, and therefore we can get much more efficiency. I think that's probably a much more honest way of approaching this. And
it's just tough right now because obviously there are a lot of companies with a lot of money writing on this, and there's just a lot of like fantastical promises, right? And like it's just tough to know because people kind of point to like the .com boom on both sides of it, the .com boom and bust on both sides, right? Which is to say, you can kind of point and say, like, look at the .com bust. Like obviously it was a giant bubble, and that the same thing's going to happen to these AI companies. But then people point out and say, well, the .com bubble did pop, but the prophecies of the .com people did come true. They just happened 15 years later than everyone thought, right? And I think if the prophecies of the AI folks become true, even if it is 15 years later from now, like we're still entering a radically different world than the one we grew up with.
Yeah, I had this conversation with a friend recently, and I was like, because we were kind of talking about like, are we in a bubble or not? And I was like, if we're in a bubble, that should give us pause. But if we're not in a bubble, if we're actually at the beginning of something that's actually like way larger growth than we can even imagine, that should also give us pause. Like
Right.
both of these scenarios are something that is hard to even reason about, and sure, I do, I read these concerns or watch some videos on the concerns of like this weird kind of like, NVIDIA being worth $5 trillion and all of these investments are kind of weird. And it does feel kind of like it could be a house of cards. The guy from The Big Short just came out and did like $1 billion bet short sale bet against Palantir and, and OpenAI. Yeah. And so like, you're like, okay, well, he's a doomsdayer. I mean, he's been saying the world's about to end
Right.
since the Big Short, but he's putting his money where his mouth is. That's interesting. Again, at the end of the day, it's interesting. He's either going to be like super right or super wrong, and both of those are interesting ideas.
I don't know, man. I think there's a bubble. Like, I'm just seeing. I don't get it. Like,
and that's a concern. That's like the Warren Buffett problem, right? It's like, don't invest in stuff you don't understand. It is very disorienting, right?
I'm just seeing things like Cursor's margins are awful. They're like negative 300%. I look at this company Mercor, which is like an AI like training company. I don't even know what they do. They just raised a Series B at $2 billion valuation. Do you have any idea how long it took Uber to get to $1 billion valuation?
Right.
Uber, which revolutionized transportation, right? Like,
but also, also not a profitable company, right? Like that was the funny thing is that they undermined. It's weird because I thought the days of Uber were gone, where you basically had a business model that you're like, the more you scale, the more expensive this becomes, and you actually are doing worse on profitability. And I was like, oh, those days are gone because money's not free anymore. And then the AI things happen, and you're like, this is such a weird. The weird part, though, that's also disorienting, is that from a U.S. government policy standpoint, we've gone all in on protecting AI domestically, so crypto and AI are in this weird place where strategically, like the geostrategic sort of pieces here is that I'm not sure if the current administration will allow it to fail, which is like a whole other question. And again, I can't guess what that means. Like that's a really, we're in a weird position where like, if we let this collapse, there's a real chance that like China and some other countries would take over. And you're like, that this is geopolitics that it's like way out of my league. I'm not even able to guess, right? What's happening.
But with OpenAI, why has OpenAI announced that they're making the porn chatbot, right? Why have they like why OpenAI is publishing, like they've secured all these like $1 billion contract, like B2B contracts, like we're working with Walmart, we're working with blah blah blah, we're working with Macy's, who knows, right? And I'm just a little like, if you thought AGI was around the corner, why would you be trying to do like all this? Like OpenAI strategy until this point has been like, work on the models, make the models really good, and then let everyone else kind of take care of like implementing said models. I think with the release of ChatGPT 5, which again, Sam Altman hyped up as being like the Death Star, and then ChatGPT 5 came out and was so underwhelming that they had to re-release the legacy models because some people preferred them. And then they are expanding into all of these other areas. Like OpenAI looks to me like a company that has recognized that they've achieved about what they think they're going to be able to achieve with the large language model technology. And so now what they need to do is they need to be the ones to claim all of like to reap all of the benefits of that, right? I think they've kind of realized like someone's going to build the porn chatbot. It might as well be us. Someone is going to implement AI throughout all of Walmart's, systems. Might as well be us. I don't know. I'm just one guy. I'm a guy with a podcast, right? But I just see so much of this, and I'm just like, geez Louise, like this looks like a bubble. And I don't know. Well, hopefully I'm wrong, AI bros. Hopefully you get rich beyond your wildest dreams. Maybe send some money my way when that happens. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm skeptical.
Right. I think there's a disadvantage to overselling its capabilities. Right. And I think that's actually, this also gets into the crux of this beyond vibe coding piece, which is, I think perfect quote. Okay. So there's a section on security audits that, of course, again, piqued my interest. There's really good sort of like principles, and we won't get too much into all of the details, but here's some high level ones. It's like you need to leverage automated security scanners. Of course, security scanners are increasingly using large language models, but there's also what are called SAST, which is the static analysis tools. All of these things are still really important. You need these other tools to kind of go in and be like, am I doing something existentially stupid? You should do this anyway. And I would say all of these security audit things that it talks about with large language models, you should do with your team anyway. So use a separate AI as reviewer. Again, this is sort of like, hey, if you're using ChatGPT, use Claude in a different persona to come in and just like review with that specific focus. Perform human code reviews with a security checklist. Again, and he talks about this other places in the book, but like keeping a human in the loop is just from like an ethics standpoint should be there. Penetration testing and fuzzing. Obviously, you should be doing this anyway, but you really need to do this with code that you didn't write. Providing updates to compensate for training cutoffs. So, I'm sorry, provide updates to compensate for training cutoffs. And these are interesting ones that come up too. Of like, the last one that I think really wanted to bring up though is it's just because slow down. And the idea was that like, yes, just because these tools can make you go 1,000 miles an hour doesn't mean you should actually go 1,000 miles an hour on all of your processes. That take the speed advantages that some of the large language models give you, and then just like slow down, like take a breather. And there's a Dune quote, and this is where I'll stop before I get your insight on this, Carter, because there's a quote from when Dune, I think it was one of the later Dune books, and he said, they increase the number of things that we do without thinking. Things we do without thinking, there's the real danger. And I thought that was like a beautiful description of the dangers of using AI as a convenience tool, and you stop thinking, you shut down the thinking. I think that's the real danger in any domain if you start using these tools that way.
Yeah, I'm trying to evaluate my usage of them, because you talked about like don't commit code you don't understand, and like obviously I've just been thinking about that. Like obviously when I commit my code, I'm not like, I don't know what the freak this is doing, right? Like I skim it, I'm like, okay, I see what this is doing. Let's move ahead with this. But at the same time, like there's some really valuable learnings that come from really struggling over how to get something working, and like even like a roughly simple implementation, something that AI can knock out very quickly. We know how it is. Sometimes you get into like that rut where like you just can't get it working, and you're going over and over and again, and then it's like it's some dumb thing like a config variable was messed up, right? Or trying to debug a particularly tricky bug, and now I can just kind of feed it into Claude first and be like, do you have any ideas? And a lot of times it'll be like, okay, yeah, like here's what it is. I'm like, great, I that's awesome. I that took me 5 minutes when it might have taken me 2 hours before, because I would have had to like step through line by line of the code and really triage it and figure out like what is going on. And so like we're more efficient, and that's good. But at the same time, sometimes I think those hours lost weren't really lost, and we were thinking and we were getting better at what we did. I don't know.
Yep.
Are we missing something here?
So I've been using Claude with a code base that's pretty hefty and complex. We're doing some pretty big changes to it. It's very important that I write the code. So that's like an interesting caveat, but I will get it to help me with some throwaway stuff, or helping me understand all the different places the code is touched. And even if I get it to do a throwaway implementation, I'll actually then say, help explain this to me. Because the other thing is I have another engineer on our team that if I implemented something and didn't have an explanation for it, he's going to ask. He's like a super smart guy. And he's like, how did you get that to work? Or, I didn't realize that there was this method available to this, or, whatever. And if I'm just like, I don't know, I mean, just took some suggestions and put it in there. And so it's been a nice forcing function versus my back channel tool, where again, I didn't add the maturity till recently, which was, for instance, I wanted to rip out, right now everything's built in Svelte kit, and all of the business logic was kind of mixed and mingled into Svelte kit. And I was like, the wrapper that I have, the opinionated wrapper that I have around Peer.js, which is, this WebRTC library, it'd be kind of cool if it was all the business logic for that, and I could just do unit testing was like all there.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was separate and just happened to be that I implemented the sort of backchannel core library inside of this Svelte kit. But to do that safely, I needed to get Playwright to help me with end-to-end testing. And I basically made it so that all the end testing had to never change. It did TDD, right? So I wrote these tests that went green on the behavior in the browser. And then I could start building this core library and then start swapping it out in my Svelte kit code until I was back to green, right? So I knew that the functional output of this was exactly the same, the way that the web UI rendered stuff and state changed and these other things. And until I opinionatedly put in my criteria for this passing, like doing Playwright, doing these other things, it was a complete mess. Like I was trying to do the refactor. I was kind of doing test coverage. It was just like a complete spaghetti mess. And then I was like, you know what? I'm the adult in the room. I need to put some constraints on this. And then I was able to it was much easier. I actually let it vibe out some of the big refactoring. And then I went back and did an in-depth code review. And I feel like, again, you have to be in the right comfort level. I'm okay with that. It was my personal project, so I could do that. But it's a little less hands-on at first, where I'm more concerned about the output versus where every line I have to be accountable for. It's very important that my reputation's on the line. I have to be able to explain this. If I'm using an AI tool to help me, it really I have to do it slower, right? So this is like the augmented AI slower thing. It still made me way faster. If I had to have 50 tabs and a bunch of different branches and tags and things that are open to do research, this compressed that part of it. But the code that I decided to implement had to be from me. And so those are like two different worlds that I've lived in. And I understand and appreciate both. I think that there's actually a time and place for each one.
Well, that's a good segue into, he has a whole chapter on autonomous background coding agents, which is a hot topic and controversial. This is where you get into something kind of like Devin, which is the promise is like, oh, you just give it the Jira ticket, and then in the background it's going to kind of complete all of this for you. George Oraz, another friend of the podcast, look at us name dropping,
so much,
has talked about, like, Microsoft has pivoted here with like Copilot, where now Copilot, like, there's no commits solely authored by Copilot. Copilot will be listed as like a co-author with the actual engineer. And one of the golden rules that Addy Osmani gives for responsible AI use is always keep a human in the loop. So now we get to these kind of background agents. The idea you can just give it a Jira ticket and it will construct the PR for you. I think Addy might say, like, well, you're still keeping a human in the loop because it's generating a PR and a human has to review it. He talks about with autonomous agents that some are getting more intelligent, that they can understand when they're unsure about something and they can ask the team. So they might kind of like ping you in Slack and be like, hey, should I use this library or this library? But yeah, autonomous agents. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
So, and we'll bring this up later. I've been very skeptical of autonomous agents. I'm in a monthly meetup now with other folks. I think it's like the last Friday of the month in the morning. There's a group of us who like talk about how we're using AI tools. I was invited to it, but I actually found it very fascinating because there's some folks who are like all in. They've got 10 agents doing all kinds of crazy stuff for them all the time. And then I've got some folks who are just like super paranoid, home lab, running their own large language model, don't trust the cloud, mostly doing it for research to try to figure out how they can break it. And it's nice to have both of these like very far ends of the spectrum. And I've been using Claude Code, which is agentic, right? Claude Code goes off and does some stuff and then comes back, right? You let it kind of work this way. And you can even have sub-agents, which I haven't really delved into. You can give it different personas and different, perspectives and kind of have this like council of agents type sort of pattern. I've not explored that tremendously because I do like the sort of augmented AI planning heavy mode aspect, because I do like writing the code that I write, and I'm doing software architecture and I'm doing these other things. So I am very hands-on. on purpose, right? But I would like to see where these things are, and is there a way that you can structure work that agents are a nice complement? I don't think that you can give them a, task like build me $1 billion idea. You're the CEO and you're the, platform engineer and you're the, marketing person and build me a business. I think that's really dumb. Like there's no evidence that anybody can do these things and that this is what large language models can handle. But if you're like giving an autonomous agent the ability to follow a principle on refactoring code from Martin Fowler's book on, changing the connaissance of something or whatever, and it's looking for opportunities in your code base and opening these small little PRs that kind of just like tidy up the code in like nice little tight little ways. And you can review that and it's, 30 lines of code in one file and you're like, oh yeah, that is nice. That's like better documentation and good test coverage and these other things. I could see a world in which you have these little tidy bots that are like coming around and just like sprucing things up for you.
Right.
In a near future, like I don't see why that wouldn't be a problem of just saying you give them a set of principles and you give them some kind of patterns to look for, and then they can find those. I think that'd be a really interesting thing. But I don't know. Do y'all use autonomous agents?
Autonomous? No, nothing autonomous. We're all equipped with Claude and Cursor and use that a lot. But the more I think about it, the more I think like we constantly joke about like the low priority backlog. Like we just have a huge backlog of tickets that are just like, and we're pretty honest. I do like that about my company, that like we are not an everything is a priority company, right? And so we're pretty honest about if there's a little bug, and we'll mark it as low priority, and then it never ever gets done, right? Like just because like we're constantly pulling from the high priority stuff. One day we did do a couple days like a few weeks ago, which was nice. It was like just a Friday, Monday, Tuesday, and we said all we're doing is working on backlog tickets right now, and that was nice. But thinking about that, I'm like, I don't know. Is that the kind of thing an autonomous agent might do okay at? Like these sorts of things where we're never getting around to this sort of stuff. And so let's have the autonomous agent kind of work its way through these tickets and generate a bunch of PRs. And, we'll take a look at the PRs, and if it fixes it, that's great. And if it doesn't, like, who cares? Because this wasn't very high priority stuff for us to begin with. Like, I could see some utility in that. I mean, I don't know how much we would pay for that necessarily. And like kind of like you were saying, like I wouldn't trust this thing to generate $1 billion idea or to build really business critical stuff, but I don't know. Maybe there's something there.
Yeah, and I have seen there's a couple of startups that I've looked at with engineers I've either worked with or close friends of mine who are from industries in the security space. And I do think there are some really promising work with large language model security refactoring, where they'll not only will they take like a security report that says, hey, you could have a buffer overflow in this thing or whatever. It actually gives you like an idiomatic correction to that code as a PR, right? So basically like, some security scanning tool comes in and says bad thing that you're doing. And
Right.
it actually can take that and suggest the actual real fix for it. I think that's that sort of tight feedback loop where it's not too overwhelming to review the code that's there. It's principled. It gives anytime we can limit the constraints on the large language model, I feel like their outputs are better. And in that case, you really want it to be boring and correct, right? Like that's like a security fix isn't something you're like, oh my gosh, this is like the best new cool idea ever. I've almost never seen a good thing come out of that. But if it's just like avoiding yak shaving, right? And we've talked about this before. Right. But if it's like avoiding me having to fix 5 things to fix the one thing I care about, and that's just like a do the right thing up to that point, I feel like large language models have been incredibly valuable in that area. And so again, just like a good CI/CD pipeline, if I can make it less expensive to try to make a small change and then push that into production, the better. And I feel like the same thing with these large language models. Like I don't want a 50 file, 10,000 line count PR from a large language model. That's horrible. Like it's an absolute nightmare. But if it's a 20 line change, well reasoned and has a clear lineage to how it got to that, I'd welcome that. That's like the death by 1,000 cuts. That would be really nice to have, fixed to your company.
Oh, okay. I was going to quote you on that. That'd be the death by 1,000 cuts. That'd be really nice.
Yeah, really. Death by a thousand cuts that we all want, right? Like,
Well,
no.
we got a couple minutes left here. Anything else from the book that stood out to you that you want to make sure we talk about before we sign off?
Yeah, I will say, chapter 11 is the beyond code generation chapter. I was hoping there would be more there.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, where are we going with this? And it brought up some ideas that I agree. Like, are we going to get into a world of like natural language driven development? I'm skeptical, and I'll tell you this as somebody who's been in the
So am I.
Apple ecosystem for a long time. Apple Script was meant to be this natural language ish programming language to like naturally do things, and everyone hates it. I will tell you, it's really easy to read and incredibly
Mhm.
difficult to write. So you read it and you're
Right.
like, oh, that's just prose. It's like, it makes total sense. And when you try to write Apple Script, you're like, I am so confused as to what I'm supposed to do right now. And I know it's a bit of an obsession, but like determinism is important. So like
Mhm.
large language models being in your pipeline kind of freaks me out because it's inherently non-deterministic.
Right.
And
Right.
you need to give them the same types of tasks that you give humans because humans are also non-deterministic.
Mhm.
And so, there's that thing that floats around on LinkedIn. It's like, the future of programmers, and it's using Claude to do like 2+2. I mean, sorry, it's like OpenAI to do 2+2 and then like get the output. And it's like
Yeah.
stupidly expensive. And, maybe won't be correct. I think that just because we have this really powerful tool, we're probably over applying it for a lot of things, and that we're,
Right.
using it as this sort of creative boundary and then scaling it back and being like, actually, we have these really cool things called computers and they can do repeatable tasks at scale very efficiently. And maybe we should use those to do that. We shouldn't forget about that, I guess.
Yeah, he does have a great quote at the end where he says, "The future of programming is being written right now, not just in code, but in how we choose to integrate these AI partners into our work. It's an exciting, uncharted path, and each of us gets to be a pioneer. So step forward, experiment boldly, share freely, and lead with the best of human intellect and spirit. By doing so, you won't just be adapting to the future, you'll be actively shaping it." Which, I think is a nice sentiment that, like, we really are at the forefront of a very new age in the industry, and we're not ever going back to how we programmed 5 years ago. um, and so, yeah, I mean, how much of working with agents and command line stuff like Claude or integrated IDE stuff like Cursor is common sense versus how much is there kind of a best practices yet to be discovered? I don't know. um, but it's an exciting time in the industry, if only because I've heard it said that your body doesn't know the difference between nervous and excited. So if you're nervous, you just have to convince yourself you're excited. I feel a little that way right now.
Oh, wow.
What are your hot takes, Nathan? Any hot takes?
I only have one hot take, and that again, it's a reiteration of another hot take I had last week, which is uh, the autonomous agent section is doomed to have a short shelf life. We've read
Yeah.
enough of these books that you kind of get a sense for it, but yeah, in 6 months it'll be outdated and be like, oh, that's all they could do.
Right, right.
So
And if you talk to Addy, I'm sure he'd be like, "Yep, I knew that was gonna happen, but like you have to have a section on it, and so
exactly, yeah.
why not?" But I'm with you. Look, I'll just say it again. I think there's a bubble. I don't know how big the bubble is, um, but I'm just looking at some of these valuations, and it's hard for me to kind of wrap my head around it. Like I guess I'll say it's easy for me to wrap my head around it if you're valuing these companies under with the understanding that the models are going to keep getting exponentially better, and one day it will like reach AGI somewhat soon, like in the next 5 years or so. Like then, yeah, I see why these companies could have like $2 billion valuations. I'm just very skeptical that that's something that's going to happen. I think for better or worse, we'll know within the next 3 to 5 years. And yeah, I don't know. I'll see you on the other side of whatever it is, folks. I think, like you were talking about, Nathan, like it's a pretty extreme reality either way. Either it's a bubble, either it's not. Hopefully,
Right.
hopefully if it's a soft bubble, if it is a bubble. I don't know, folks. Stay tuned. We'll find out together.
Yeah.
Uh, well, I mean, so we finished this book. That is another book. done and gone here at Book Overflow. So what are you going to do differently in your career, Nathan, as a result of the book?
This book has convinced me to spend a little bit more time with autonomous agents. I still think I'm in the pretty heavy skeptic camp, but it's always nice to know um, what the current tooling is, and maybe I'll come up with a toy app idea
Right.
that I should let some autonomous agents help me out with, and let's see how hilarious it is, I guess.
Yeah. I feel the same way. I need to look at like some of these autonomous agents that are out there, look at the free, like do they have any sort of free tier or, a
Mhm.
trial period or something like that. And then, yeah, I need to just give it some of these like very, very low priority backlog tasks, the kind of things where it's like, look, if this never gets done, we're going to survive as a business, but it'd be nice if it got done. And like, it could be neat to have something that's just kind of continually churning through those sorts of things. Again, I'm skeptical and I don't want to get into a situation where we're just committing a bunch of crap to the app, but
Right.
could be worth it. Could be a pretty easy improvement. So I don't know. We'll give it a look. What about recommendations, Nathan? Who'd you recommend the book to?
I will keep my recommendations to what the author made. So this is unchanged, but the book says there's three audiences. That is experienced engineers, product focused engineers, and engineering leadership. By after finishing this book, I firmly agree. I think that all three of those audiences would get a lot out of this.
Yeah, I had agreed last week too, although I had said like there's a nice section about juniors here and kind of targeted towards them. I say after reading the whole book, that's about the only section targeted towards juniors. And so again, junior engineers out there, like whenever we recommend a book to like, oh, we recommend this more experienced engineers. I think if your goal is to become a senior engineer or a staff engineer and you want a glimpse as to what that looks like and what kinds of things people at that like level are thinking about, like read these books. I mean, it's
Yeah,
a great way
true.
to, yeah,
Yeah.
to level up your career. It's just more that like for example, like a philosophy of software design is a great book that I would recommend even to CS students.
Hmm.
And I think you can get a lot out of it by reading it there. I think this is more, if you read this, it's going to be a little more like, eavesdropping on mom and dad's conversation when they have friends over, right? Which is fine. I learned a lot that way as a kid. But, maybe not the most applicable to you right at this very moment. But with that, we are done with Beyond Vibe Coding by Addy Osmani. We're going to cover next week. We have an essay. It's the Tao of Programming, I think, which is very, very short and more like it's kind of more like it's humorous to a degree. So we're
Good.
going to read that, which I think will be a lot of fun. And then we're off for Thanksgiving, and then we'll have a few special episodes. But that right there was the last book of 2025. But we're excited. Like we talked about, we're coming in fresh in the new year with designing data intensive applications. We know that's one that people have been wanting for a long time. It's one we wanted to do for a long time, and we're going to be the best position we've ever been to tackle it with nice and fresh after a bit of a break. Thanks for listening, everyone. You can always find us at contact@bookoverflow.io. You can find us on Twitter at bookoverflowpod. You can find me on Twitter at Carter Morgan. And you find Nathan has worked with Functionally Imperative at functionallyimperative.com. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we will see you next week.